So I am going to introduce, first of all, Mohammed El-Kurd, who is a poet and writer from Jerusalem. He's currently pursuing an MFA in poetry at Brooklyn College. His work has appeared in outlets such as The Guardian, Al Jazeera, The Nation, and many others. El-Kurd grew up with settlers living in half of his Sheikh Jarrah home, and his family now face further dispossession as settlers attempt to evict them entirely. So, without further ado, Mohammed, over to you.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I have the opportunity to speak to you. I'm looking forward for the discussion. I'll speak about Sheikh Jarrah in brief terms, and I'll give you a little bit of the history. The families of Sheikh Jarrah, like most Palestinian families, were forcibly and violently dispossessed from their homes, from their 1948 homes. My family specifically came from Haifa, Palestine, before the state of Israel was established, and we were dispossessed from.
Please put in for both of these before 3:45 p.m. this afternoon.
Can you please mute yourself? Thanks. My family came from Haifa, and in 1956, we landed in Jerusalem after coming from city to city, and the United Nations, in collaboration with the Jordanian government, decided to give us 28 housing units, really a refugee camp in the heart of Jerusalem. They told us that we had to grow a garden, have good relations with our neighbor, and pay a nominal fee. And when I say pay a nominal fee, I say less than $1 per month for 3 years. And after that, they would give us legal ownership of the homes. We did all of these things, but neither the United Nations nor the Jordanian government followed up on their promise. And then the 1967 war happened, and annexation happened, and obviously Israel annexed Jerusalem and has control over Jerusalem. Our battle with Israeli settlers began in the 70s when multiple settler organizations began claiming ownership of our homes. Most of these settler organizations like Elad or Nakhlat Sham'on are headquartered in the United States. Some of them have buildings in Sheikh Jarrah, and all of them explicitly say proudly that they want to Jewaize the entirety of the city, that they are doing this on a mass scale, that they are doing this to completely eradicate Palestinian presence from our native city. A lot of misinformation has been circulating about Sheikh Jarrah in the media, in large news outlets, like the New York Times and New Yorker and stuff like that, even when our first round of evictions happened in 2009. I want to say that it's important to understand the context of the Israeli judicial system that we're going against. No one can deny that this dispossession is being made possible by a judicial system that was built by and for Israeli settlers. A judicial system that is inherently biased, that is founded on ethnic supremacy, founded on racism, founded on bigotry, founded on Zionist values that do not validate our lives or our claim. So, sorry, I got distracted because people keep if you don't mind muting yourself, please. Okay, so in the 70s, Israeli settler groups began claiming our land and claiming our homes, and the legal battle lasted for many decades. And then in 2008, they began taking over home after home. It began with Kamil's house that was above us, and then they took 3 other homes, and they took over half of our home. They threw us in the street, and then we live in the second half of our home. It's important to understand that we have documents that prove our ownership of the land, that prove the promises made by the United Nations and the Jordanian government for us, and the Israeli courts are refusing to see them. The Israeli courts are refusing to look at our documents. They're refusing to let us have an argument, but still they're operating within this pseudo-democracy facade where we can allegedly challenge the states of Israel claim to our land, when in fact we cannot. Also, the Israeli settlers have had multiple occasions where they forge documents or say that they have ownership claims to the land. Our lawyer that works with the Norwegian Council of Refugees, NRC, Norwegian Refugee Council, alongside with my father, went to Turkey, to the taboo there, to look for the ownership in the archives that the settlers claimed to have, and there was nothing to be found. But the scales are not in our favor because obviously we're going against an Israeli judicial system that does not listen to us, does not care about us, and is ideologically driven, right? It's driven on ethnic supremacy. It's driven on this idea that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and so all Palestinians must just vent for themselves and do whatever they need. I'll talk to you a little bit about my own experience growing up in Jerusalem. I'll say something a bit mundane, you know. I can say that I'm 22 years old, and my entire life, in the entirety of my life, I have never been outside of the house with my family, ever. We've never been outside of the house together. It's, in other words, meaning we've never left the home alone. It's like we've had shifts, and I would stay in the house, and then if my mom had to go somewhere, I would stay in the house. If I needed to go to school, my aunt had to come to the house, because we were constantly afraid that Israeli squatters would just come and declare ownership over our homes. And this happened in 2009. Before we even heard the ruling of the case on our home, Israeli squatters came with police and army and sat in our home and took over half of our home. So I think we need to get over this facade and this vocabulary of eviction, right? It is a mass eviction, it is forced eviction, but it's not. Eviction implies this legal narrative, this legal authority that Israel has over us, when in fact this is mere arrogation. It's mere theft, it's land theft. And just because they conceal it in legislation and they conceal it with their laws that they made for them and by them to adhere to ethnic supremacy, does not make it just, and does not make it. And Palestinians are never going to find justice in Israeli courts. We still do. We still go to the courts. We have a court date in February, on February 9th. We're going to hear the ruling on whether or not we're going to be thrown in the street in the middle of a pandemic from our own homes. And it's frustrating, and it's heartbreaking, and it's a lot of things, especially in the middle of a pandemic, but also especially knowing that this is not the first time my family is going through this, and it's not the first, and even when our house is taken, it's not going to be the last home in Jerusalem that is taken from Palestinians. They do this in separate court cases. They do this on separate occasions. They like elongate these processes for a very long, like they elongate these processes for decades to escape the public eye, to escape the international community, because they understand how the news cycle operates, and because they understand that if we make a fuss about it before it even happens, news outlets are not going to want to hear from us when it actually happens. And I know this from experience. I'm worried about my family. I'm worried about my mother. I'm worried about my father. My father was dispossessed in the Nakba and saw the blood and fire in 1948. He was just 6 years old when he was dispossessed. My grandmother, who passed away this year, I'm honestly, you know, this is kind of hard to say, but I'm honestly heartbroken. I'm honestly happy to say that she passed away this year, because this would have been like her 5th time getting dispossessed. She was dispossessed from Haifa, and then from Shfa'amar, and then from Nazareth, and then from Jerusalem in 2009. You know, we are seeing a continuation of dispossession from 1948 that is happening on a small micro scale all across historical Palestine, be it in Khan al-Ahmar or Susia or villages like that, be it in Al-Isawiya, in Silwan, or in Sheikh Jarrah. We are seeing this happening on a massive scale. And if you look at the statistics and the numbers, even my 22 years of living, I have seen, you know, my country dwindle down in size. I've seen my people, like, I've seen the names of the streets disappear. And it's really frustrating. I've been talking about this since I was 11 years old, and it feels like there's nothing we can do to prevent it from happening. We've been doing advocacy work for decades. You know, my grandmother, I'll tell you another story about her. And this is why I came to speak to you today. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm very glad we did this. But I'll say this very frankly. My grandmother, who spoke a bit of English, she died when she was 105 years old. Since 2009, we've had many, many visitors who were British nationals. And every time she would find out that somebody was a British national, she would tell them, like, you have responsibility. And I want to second my grandmother's legacy. You know, a lot of the time, these British nationals, these activists, these friendly people who would come to support us would, you know, giggle at that comment and find it endearing because, you know, she's in her 90s and spoken broken English. But there's so much truth to that, be it because of the Balfour Declaration or because of the British colonial mandate in Palestine, or because of you know, the UK letting Israel just run ruckus in our lives. We do not have the means to go against the state of Israel. We do not have the resources. We don't have the lawyers to do any of this. And I say this as a privileged Palestinian in a sense, right? Because I speak English, because my story, my life story, the story of Sheikh Jarrah has been broadcasted on an international level because we have a bunch of consulates in our neighborhood and because I can speak English, right? But people in Khan al-Ahmar, people in Susia, people in Silwan, people with lesser education, people who don't have English capabilities, don't have lawyers, don't even get to be in rooms like this and advocate for themselves. It's also important to understand, and I'm gonna be like finishing up in a second, it's also important to understand that these settler organizations are working and collaborating with the state of Israel, and they are getting tons of funding. For example, Elad, one of the settler organizations located in Jerusalem, located in Sheikh Jarrah, in my neighborhood, that is working for my dispossession, just got a $100 million donation from a UK, I believe the name of the football team is called Chelsea. The owner of Chelsea, Abramovich or whatever, gave them $100 million. So please, I ask you to take this and advocate for us and advocate against our dispossession. And I also want you to speak about this beyond the facade of Israel's legality, beyond the facade of Israel's judicial system, because it's a judicial system built by and for settlers on ethnic supremacy. We are never going to win a battle against the state of Israel, and we need international community intervention. We need people to help us. We are going on to court on the 9th of February, and I really hope that me and my family and the 12 other homes in Sheikh Jarrah do not end up on the street that day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. And you described your experience, talking about your experience as mundane. Let me reassure you, it is not mundane. And as a parliamentarian, it's so helpful to us if we are speaking in our parliaments about this issue on your behalf, for us to say that we've spoken to you and we share your experience. And having visited some of the communities, Khan al-Ahmar and Susia that you mentioned, I've talked about my experience of visiting those places and what is going on there. So never describe your story as mundane, but thank you very, very much. We'll move now to our next speaker, who I think is going to share some slides with us, Hagit Ofran. Hagit works at Settlement Watch, the Settlement Watch project at the Israeli peace movement, Peace Now, and is widely recognised as one of Israel's foremost experts on a full range of issues related to the West Bank, settlements and settlement-related developments in East Jerusalem. Over to you, Hagit. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Hi, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mohammed, for your very important explanations and feelings on what you are going through. And I think maybe the bottom line from Mohammed's speech, but also from mine, is that Israel will tell you that it's a legal matter. But we are here to tell you that it's not a legal matter, it's a political matter. its scheme to dispossess Palestinians and bring settlers instead, and it is done through legal means, through the Israeli courts, through the Israeli law system, but it's all political. And I would like to also to stress to you what the government can do if the government wanted to prevent this disaster from happening. But I want us to try to give you some context of where and what are we talking about. So this is a map I'm sharing with you of Jerusalem before 67. The green line was the border, is in the middle of the city. You have Israel in blue here, Israel, Jerusalem, and all the browns are Palestinian areas that were under Jordan, and the old city in the heart was under Jordan. And then in 1967, there was an annexation. The Israeli government decided to annex 70 square kilometers around East Jerusalem in order to make sure that this will be our internal undivided city, capital of Israel, and started to settle in East Jerusalem. And in East Jerusalem, we have three kinds of settlements. One is the settlements that were built by the government, like big neighborhoods all around the Palestinian neighborhoods. Here you can see all those blue areas. And actually, in order to build them here, all the neighborhoods, Israel confiscated from Palestinians around 24,000 dunams, and in order to allow the construction of housing for Israelis in those settlements. And the idea is to circle East Jerusalem so that it will be disconnected from the Palestinian areas, so that it will not be able to be part of a future capital of the Palestinian people. Now, the second kind of settlement is settlement inside Palestinian neighborhoods. This is the zoom-in map of the area of the old city. Over here, this is the old city. The brown areas are the Palestinian neighborhoods, and the red dots are houses that were taken by settlers inside Palestinian neighborhoods. And you have south of the old city, you have Silwan, you have Batan el-Hawa, where we have similar story like what we're talking today in Sheikh Jarrah, Ras El Amud, Mount of Olives, Suwane, Sheikh Jarrah in the north, and also in the south. So if you connect the dots, we have a ring of settlements around the old city, which is injecting to the religious aspect of our conflict, making more friction around the old city. The idea is to bring as many Israelis to live inside Palestinian neighborhoods so that it will become more Israeli or more Jewish, so that Israel will not be able to compromise over it and will never give it up and allow a Palestinian capital to evolve here. Another thing you can see on this map is the third kind of settlement, which is the touristic settlement, which is very important, but we're not going to go into it. All the green area around the old city is a national park. There is another park planned around Sheikh Jarrah also. And the idea is they cannot bring the thousands of Israelis to live inside Palestinian neighborhoods, but they will try to bring them to visit there and to reinforce the Jewish connection to those sites and do archaeology, and that's very, very dramatic, and it's changing all the public domain in East Jerusalem. Now, we are now focusing specifically on what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. What it looks like, those settlements inside Palestinian neighborhoods, is usually they manage to take hold of a house, and you will see usually an Israel flag in the middle of a Palestinian area, and guards on top of it. And in order to get into this house, they will always need a lot of force. This is from Silwan, from July 19, when they got to the Siam family. The police will need to escort the settlers in order to kick out the Palestinian family. And it's an important point, because if you will try to address the Israeli authorities, the fact that they need the police here is a key to stop it. And in the past, political pressure made the government to refrain from sending the police, and the eviction did not take place. So it's an important point to look at. But in order to understand what is the legal background of all of this, because it's still, I mean, the discussion is the legal discussion, and I want really to try to do it in short. In 1948, there was a horrible war in our land. We call it the War of Independence, because it was the beginning of the establishment of the State of Israel. The Palestinians call it the Nakba, the disaster, because for them it was a disaster. The outcome of this war was that all of the red dots that you see here are Palestinian villages, towns that were destroyed in the war, and we had hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that became refugees, lost their homes. And the newly established State of Israel had to decide what to do with all those millions of dunams that belonged to Palestinians who are not here because they were kicked out during the war. And the decision was not to allow them to return. Now, there could be many justifications to that, why Israel could not afford to have them go back, okay. So they legislated a law in 1950 called the Absentees Property Law, that said that Palestinians cannot return to their homes. And the El-Kurd family, and actually all of the families in Sheikh Jarrah, were refugees that this law says they cannot return to their homes. This is a map of Jerusalem in 48, and all the browns are Palestinian neighborhoods, villages, and there was around 35,000 Palestinians lost their homes in what became West Jerusalem, in villages like Lifta, in neighborhoods like Talbiyah, Katam, Baka. All of them are now part of my Jerusalem. And however, there were also very small neighborhoods of Jews. One in Sheikh Jarrah, in the old city and the Jewish quarter, in Silwan, Musrara. Around 2,000 Jews lost their homes in this war also. And what happened to those Jews was, okay, they lost their property, but they did not become refugees because they all got citizenship immediately in Israel, and they got compensation in the form of a new house. If they had a house and a shop, they got a house and a shop in Israel from the Israeli government. So we have one war and two very different outcomes to those who lost their properties. Now comes 67, and I told you that Israel annexed 70 square kilometers around the East Jerusalem, and those lands, like in Sheikh Jarrah, became now part of Israel. And there was a question what to do with those properties. And the Knesset decided to legislate a law in 1970 that said that whoever had a property in East Jerusalem, this law applies only in East Jerusalem, and that was controlled by the Jordanians during the 48 to 67, then this owner may take it back, or if you want to apply the right of return. So it's already a discriminatory law because it only applies to Jews, that they can return to their property. On top of that, you have how this law was implemented. And in fact, no Jewish owner ever returned to their homes. It was only settler groups that managed to get the property from the heirs, or in the case of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, even it wasn't even privately owned by a person. It was owned by Jewish trusts or associations that bought the land. Or in Sheikh Jarrah, the very big question mark about whether it was owned by whether this was the real piece of land, but it doesn't matter. Let's assume it was belonged to this Jewish association. Now settlers managed to take over this association, and in the name of this ownership before 48, now they are asking to kick out the Palestinians from their homes. And this is a map, an aerial photo of Sheikh Jarrah. We have all the houses that are here in red have court cases pending of eviction. El-Kurd family is this house. I don't know if you see my marker, but all the blue houses are already settlements. And you can see that half of the house or a part of the house already taken by settlers. Now, all the houses that are marked with light blue frame already have an eviction ruling that was ruled in the magistrate court during 2020. And next week, there is a hearing in the appeal in the district court for 4 of the families here, including El-Kurd family, and another 3 families have their hearing in the beginning of March. And actually, it's almost the last legal chance. And as you understand, the law is the problem here. The law says that they can own it, they can return to it, and the judges are not so happy to get out of their way in order to interpret the law in a way that makes justice. And just to complete what Mohammed said, this is part of an agreement that was signed between the families in Sheikh Jarrah and the Jordanian government and the UN. It was with 3 parties. And in this agreement, they, as refugees, agreed to give up on their refugee status in order to rehabilitate in the house that was built by the Jordanian government for them. And it's not that they are like squatters that, went in a property that was owned by Jews, etc. No, they got it legally. They were there, and nobody told them that it was wrong for many, many years. And suddenly comes those settlers and sue them out of their homes. And all of them have properties like this property of the Sabah family in Jaffa in Jerusalem. So they cannot return to their properties in West Jerusalem. So to conclude, we are standing here on a very discriminatory basis of law, and it's all done through the Israeli courts as if it's a legal matter. But as I told you, it's not that those Jews who owned it now really want to return to their homes. It's not about it. It's about settlers who want to take over those properties and use this law in order to make it. And I can also elaborate a lot of help that they got from the governments throughout the years. And to say, lastly, that the government of Israel is the one to stop it if the government will want. First of all, not to send the police, and this will stop the eviction. Another, and if they want to solve a problem, it is possible just to confiscate it and to tell the settlers, okay, we need your land for public use. Israel confiscated 24,000 dunams for housing for Israelis in East Jerusalem. It can confiscate 10 dunams for housing in Sheikh Jarrah and in Batan el-Hawa in Silwan to allow for Palestinian housing. It's not impossible if there was a political will. So our efforts, although there is like as if it's a legal process that you think two sides can sit and have their chance in court, and they continue the fight in courts, but it's not about it. And what we need here is the intervention and the pressure on the Israeli government to stop this mass eviction.
Thank you very much, Hagit, and it's very, very illuminating seeing those maps that you showed us there. Can I start out, while others, if others can indicate in the chat if they've got questions to ask, but can I start and ask about, I mean, clearly these court hearings are very one-sided, and it's not a court case of equals. Has anybody been successful so far? Have any Palestinians been successful in actually stopping the evictions? Hagit.
According to this law, there was no real success until now. They only managed to get a status of protected tenants that gave them a few more years, and it's a very fragile status. And unfortunately, we did not have, at least not that I know, any judge that would say, okay, like Israel really likes to say, and gives an example of Cyprus, where you have Greek owner that wanted to return to their house from before 1970. In the European court said, no, you cannot return. This Turkish family has the right to live there, etc., because of the right for housing. And Israel loves this court ruling because it's helping us with our claim that Palestinians cannot return to their properties in Israel. But when it comes to settlers, then suddenly the court cannot find tools to stop it. And we see that the judges, sometimes they write very, the ruling with a lot of compassion, saying that it's a horrible story and that even that the government should compensate the Palestinians and think just words, but not to make justice. You need to be very, very brave in the court and in the political circumstances that we live in. So I don't think the court will save us here. It's a political matter.
So have you any thoughts, either of you, Mohammed or Hagit, on what us as British parliamentarians, we've got members from both houses on this call at the minute, from the House of Commons and the House of Lords, what do you think we can do? What would be in these days leading up to this February the 9th, and of course the cases following, what would you think that we can do to try and bring this to the attention of government and try and get some change?
Mohammed, you want to start?
I'll go after you.
I would say, I think the Israeli government should hear about it, that there is concern, that you see it as a big problem. And I would say that it's, because we are talking about a mass program, it's not just a case of one house. It is, you might say that it's violating the international law. All occupation and all Israeli sovereignty in East Jerusalem is not according to the international law, but to legislate such a discriminatory law and to implement such a plan, it's almost a war crime of dispossession, of forcible removal. I mean, it's something very severe. We should, I think, make it clear to the Israelis that it's something that you know of, that you hear about, and you don't want to see any family being dispossessed.
Mohammed.
I'll say that the Israeli government, I know that the Israeli government knows about it. I know that the Israeli government is in on it. There is research by Israeli academics that makes a very strong case between the ties between the Israeli government and those settler organizations that are working tirelessly to dispossess us. I think you should speak to the Israeli government as sternly as possible and not let us drown in bureaucracy and not let us down in diplomacy, and like, don't be afraid to ruffle feathers. It's shameful that this is something that I've been working on and fighting for and living through since I was a child. It is shameful that my father has lost his home more times than he has like been happy. That it's so shameful that I don't know if my children are going to be homeless as well. It's shameful that we don't know where our fate is. This is like beyond controversial. This is beyond it's beyond looking at it as a topic of debate. This is very explicitly, clearly a government and settler organizations working in collaboration to throw us out of our homes and ultimately, make us end up in the West Bank, lose our Jerusalem residencies, eradicate Palestinian presence from Jerusalem. And I say this without being hyperbolic. You see this in the urban planning that Israel does every single time that a village is declared a green land and then there's a national park created. There's a village of dozens of families dispossessed and went into the West Bank. This is about the Israeli Center of Life law that says if you are outside of Israel, outside of Jerusalem for more than a year, you lose your Israeli residency. There are so many Israeli policies that are working tirelessly around the clock to get us to leave Jerusalem. And they need to be spoken to firmly and sternly. And thank you. Thank you so much to all. I want to continue to say something that I care about deeply, and I think it's very, profound and important. I understand why we're using this term, but these are not evictions. What is going on is not an eviction. It is dispossession. What is going on, it is not eviction. Continuing to say that these are evictions. If we're going to say evictions, at least let's say mass evictions, because we continue to put this Israeli democracy, this Israeli judicial system on a pedestal. It doesn't operate within legality. I remember I wasn't alive, but during the 70s, my family and the entire neighborhood acquired an Israeli lawyer called Tosia Cohen, because we thought having an Israeli lawyer would give us more leverage in the Israeli judicial system. And what the Israeli lawyer did was kind of deceive the residents of the neighborhood who did not speak Hebrew or English at the time into signing documents that say that they are protected renters. There's so much deceit and lies and forgery that goes unquestioned within the Israeli judicial system that I think needs to be held accountable. That's my first comment. And then, again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be able to speak to you today. And I hope with all of my heart that you're able to do something. I have a question for all of you, if you would like to answer me. I told the entirety of my neighborhood, specifically the 12 families awaiting dispossession, that I was going to be meeting with you all today. I was just wondering, what should I tell them is going to be done once I get on the phone with them after this meeting? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that is a very pertinent point to end, I think, the meeting on. Can I say to Mohammed that what you can say to your family and the other families is that we have heard you very loud and clear, and our thoughts are with you all and your families, and we will, I think, all individually as parliamentarians, but we will talk collectively after this as well to see what mechanisms we can use within our power to bring this to the attention, because I think putting the spotlight on it is actually what makes the difference in these situations. As I've explained, we are limited at the minute to what we can do compared to usual, but you are at the forefront of all of our minds, and we will do whatever we can to try and help. And on that, can I thank both of you, Mohammed and Hagit, from completely different angles on this. You know, Mohammed, your testimony is very moving, and Hagit, thank you for the really clear analysis of what is going on, because both things are equally important to us, to help us. So thank you very, very much for being with us and spending your time with us today. Thank you.